The pen stopped halfway through my signature, ink pooling like a wound across the page that was supposed to crown my greatest victory. On my speaker, a planner's careful voice delivered what felt like a terminal diagnosis I'd been removed from my sister's wedding guest list. 48 floors above Seattle, where my company's venues glittered like chess pieces I'd spent a decade arranging. I stared at the skyline and felt, not the sweep of conquest, but the smallness of a child shut out of her own house. Success was loud around me. Family, as always, was louder. My name is Eleanor Wade, founder and CEO of Wade Collective, the hospitality network my father still calls Little Parties. On the desk sat an acquisition contract for a $7 million hotel that would open our 5th state. In my ear, Nadine from Velvet Knot Weddings cleared her throat and repeated the message as if an echo could make it softer. My parents had asked her to remove me. I told her I'd contributed $60,000 to Celeste's wedding. She apologized with the administrative sorrow of people who tidy messes they didn't make, adding that the funds were a gift with no expectations. I asked for itemization. Her hesitation was a wince I could hear. The email. I said, today. I've learned to calm my hands by moving them. I opened our vendor management system and the database bloomed across my second monitor, lines of blue connecting companies like constellations, a flick of search fields, a filter, a sort confirmation hit like a cold wave. Every vendor tied to Celeste's wedding sat inside my network. Florence Floral, Westlake Catering, Taylor Photography, all subsidiaries or partners I either owned or influenced. Money aside, they'd erased me using my own architecture. The phone buzzed a group text I'd never been part of, my parents trading details as if I were a distant client, not a sister or daughter. My mother boasted about an ice sculpture. My father crowed about the Wade way of celebrating. I recognized the receipts on the screen. Some had crossed my desk with different labels. I wish I could say outrage rose like a trumpet. But what rose was something older and smaller, the ache of being underestimated, until even you hesitate to claim your size. Years ago at Sunday dinner, Dad toasted my brother-in-law's promotion as a real career, then laughed about my event planning hobby. That night I wrote the check for Celeste, telling myself that success would translate eventually, that vision always earns fluency. It hadn't. I'd bankrolled the music to which they danced without inviting me onto the floor. I pressed my palm to the window until the chill stilled me. Then I called legal. Jessica, my general counsel, speaks in iron. Martin, operations, speaks in weather forecasts, contingencies, pressure systems. They arrived crisp and unreadable. The way good lieutenants do when they sense a war their commander didn't want. Jessica confirmed what I already knew and needed said aloud. Our contracts were airtight, with 21 days' notice. Vendors could withdraw without penalty. We were within the window. Martin slid a folder forward like a dealer who'd stacked the deck for me. Velvet Knot had finalized as our acquisition the day before. The venue, Willow Creek, belonged to a subsidiary. The crowning irony clicked into place. My family chose my house to celebrate my erasure. There are choices that don't feel like choices, only finally stopping your own participation in a farce. I gave the order without heat. Begin coordinated withdrawals now. Jessica lifted an eyebrow, not in doubt, but in a lawyer's ritual acknowledgement of consequence. She noted risks, optics, headlines that could bruise our Portland expansion. The word optics is made of glass. It cuts when you hold it too long. I nodded to the risks and signed the directive anyway. Power isn't cruelty. Power is clarity plus consequence. Cancellations went out like a weather front rolling over the sound. Nadine called back frantic, voice risen to the pitch of people trapped by contradictions they helped write. I told her the contracts were being exercised, thanked her for the itemization, and ended the call before guilt could be weaponized. I won't pretend it felt righteous. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff I'd spent years building, too high to climb down without breaking something that mattered. within the hour. My father's voicemail arrived. It used the phrase, criminal interference. My mother's message arrived wrapped in sugar, then in shame. Sweetheart, how could you, family? Reputation. What would people say? Not one of them asked what forced my hand or why I hadn't been included in months. That night, the city glowed beneath my windows like a living diagram. I ate nothing and watched an old video from Celeste's 16th birthday, where my mother praised my talent for little parties. That same year, I raised $2 million at a charity gala for 800 guests. But to them, the numbers were dots unconnected. I opened a fresh document and wrote in a new language: dates, sums, quotes, deposits, a ledger of erasures. Evidence has a way of sandblasting memory until the sculpture beneath appears. When I finally slept, it was brief and mean. By morning, the society page snipped at the story with glossy teeth. The vendor exodus had a whisper. My assistant Amber brought me coffee and a pastry that steamed like kindness from the paper bag. "You look like you fought the ocean," she said. I told her the ocean swung first. When my father's voice shook the reception area later, Amber tried to stop him with the fury of a sparrow. He barreled in with my mother and Celeste behind him, all urgency and entitlement, the posture of people forever certain they'll be forgiven. He asked what I thought I was doing. I told him exactly what he taught me: protecting my investments. There's a moment in every negotiation when the old script fails and silence enters like a new character. I queued up the group text on the wall screen. Let their words bloom larger than denial. The color drained in the way it does when reality refuses to be managed. Jessica and Martin arrived with folders labeled solution. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at my sister. Beneath the cosmetic shock, something honest flickered. She wasn't ready yet to step toward it. But I saw the first fracture in the story that kept me small. 2 days later, the ocean air carried salt and inevitability as I waited on the terrace of Crescent Bay Lodge, my crown jewel property perched over the Pacific. I had chosen this stage deliberately, where the architecture seemed grown from the cliff itself, a building meant to silence doubters before a word was spoken. When Celeste's car pulled up the circular drive, I watched through glass as awe crossed her face. She stepped onto the terrace, scarf whipping in the wind, her eyes sweeping the infinity pool and the horizon beyond. "This is yours," she whispered, as if the immensity of it rearranged her memories. I gestured to the leather portfolio waiting on the table. "Please sit." I laid out documents like evidence in a trial, the email from Velvet Knot confirming my removal, the bank record of $60,000 transferred to cover her costs, itemized vendor lists that matched my company's network, cancellation notices signed within the last 24 hours. Celeste's hands trembled as she turned each page. "Mom and Dad said you were too busy that weekend," she murmured. "I own the venue." "Celeste, I own the vendors. Did you really think I wouldn't discover it?" Color drained from her cheeks as realization landed. "How much of this industry do you actually control?" she asked. But before I could answer, the terrace doors burst open. Our parents stormed through, father's voice already raised, mother trailing indignation like perfume. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "I told them I was showing my sister the truth they'd buried." He waved me off as childish. A tantrum over an invitation. I pressed the remote and the wall behind me lit up with the Wade Collective's organizational chart: 18 venues across 5 states, hotels, vendors, projected revenue. Dad started to mutter about luck, about little Eleanor playing at business. I advanced slides, employee headcounts, growth curves, $83 million in annual revenue. The room shifted. Mother attempted softness, calling it my little company. My voice cut across hers. "My little company is worth more than Dad's ever was." The sentence cracked the air open. For once, silence fell on their side of the table. It was Celeste who moved first. standing sharply and telling them to leave. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard, steel bent into shape by years of seeing without understanding. They hesitated, but something in her tone left no room for negotiation. When the terrace quieted, she turned to me with tears brightening her eyes. I didn't know. That was the point. I told her. Closing the portfolio, they made sure you didn't. Jessica and Martin entered then, calm as surgeons, placing fresh portfolios on the glass table. The Laurel House is available, Jessica said. We've replicated your plan with full vendors ready to execute. 21 days is tight, but achievable. Celeste listened with new attentiveness, noticing how they addressed me with respect for the first time. She seemed to see not just what I'd built, but how many people deferred to it. Later, after she left, my parents' calls shifted tone, less command, more plea. Their friends were whispering, their associates asking questions about the sudden exposure of a daughter they had painted as insignificant, but I didn't answer. I was finished trying to earn their recognition by softening my edges. The next day, our family attorney arrived at my headquarters, briefcase snapping open with the crispness of old power. My father slid a document across the table, a compromise reinstating the original vendors if I would simply relent. I left the paper untouched. A compromise assumes equal ground, I told them. You spent $60,000 of my money while excluding me. That isn't equal. My mother leaned in with brittle charm, urging me to think of the family reputation. I reminded her it seemed to be worth exactly $60,000 plus tax. My father's jaw tightened, calling my demonstration little again, little business, little hobby, little Eleanor. I pressed a button and Amber brought in a portfolio heavy with numbers. I showed them audited statements. $83 million in revenue last year, multiples of anything my father's company ever earned. I flipped to a Wall Street Journal profile, one where I deliberately minimized family connections to spare his pride. Each page stripped another layer from their denial. I don't need your permission to be successful, I said quietly. I need your respect to be family. The door opened then and Celeste entered, eyes rimmed red but posture firm. Martin had shown her everything. She crossed the room and stood at my side. Not theirs. I set my terms without apology, the Laurel House. 1 day only, 80 guests, $185,000, prepaid. My father sputtered about outrage. I corrected him. Market rate, family discount. Celeste lifted her chin and asked for a tour. Not of the venue only, but of everything. So I showed her. In the ballroom, crystal chandeliers refracted light across marble floors that cost more than my father's first house. Staff approached me with deference. Miss Wade. Chicago called about the acquisition timeline. Miss Wade, we need approval on lighting. Each interaction was a lens correcting my sister's vision. By the time we reached my office, even my mother noticed the single personal photo on the shelf our family at Celeste's graduation. You kept this, she asked, voice small. Some things matter, I said. Celeste took my hands and asked me to be her maid of honor. I told her only if it was because she wanted me, not because she felt forced. I always did, she whispered. I just didn't know. My father stood at the window, his reflection blurred against the city. When he finally turned, his voice carried an admission I'd waited decades to hear. We never really looked. My mother signed the check for Laurel House in silence, her hand trembling. For once, there was no argument, no diminishment, only acknowledgement. Power had shifted not through rage, but through revelation. My sister embraced me with tears on her face. Over her shoulder, I met Martin's eye and gave a single nod. Make it perfect, I told him. Because sometimes family isn't about forgiveness or revenge. It's about finally being seen, and then choosing to build forward anyway. On the morning of the wedding, sunlight streamed through the Laurel House atrium, transforming its glass and steel into a cathedral of light. White roses cascaded from suspended installations. 1,000 blooms framing a space that bore my name, even if my family rarely spoke it. My team moved like an orchestra deliveries signed. Champagne chilled. Every detail synchronized without me needing to raise my voice. Years of building, years of commanding respect in rooms where I had once been overlooked, had taught them to read my gestures the way musicians read a conductor's baton. Today, perfection was not just a standard, it was a statement. Guests began to arrive, glittering in their finery, voices rising in admiration as they passed beneath the floral archways. My parents entered quietly, their postures subdued, the arrogance of weeks earlier replaced by something closer to humility. For once, my father's eyes did not dart toward his watch, measuring how long until he could leave. Instead, he took in the grandeur of the venue with an expression I couldn't quite read, part pride, part regret, and something else that looked like recognition. My mother approached me with the faintest tremor in her smile. "Everything looks stunning." "Eleanor," she said, and for the first time in memory, her words did not carry the sting of comparison. "Thank you," I replied, then introduced her to Jessica. Martin and Colin, my executives, one by one. They greeted her with the same respect they reserved for me. "Mrs. Wade, a pleasure." She looked at them in surprise, as if realizing my influence extended far beyond these walls. When the ceremony began, I stood near the altar as Celeste's maid of honor. Her gown caught the light like water, flowing with each step. As she passed me, she squeezed my hand, and the gesture spoke more than vows. The officiant's words blended with the music, the applause, the steady rhythm of the ocean beyond the glass walls. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel not the strategist or the CEO, but simply the sister, standing in a place I had once thought forever closed to me. When Celeste and James exchanged rings, the cheers rose like a tide, and I knew that no matter how fractured the past, something had been mended here, however imperfectly. Later, at the reception, the clink of crystal glasses echoed across white linen and candlelight. I rose to give my toast, the room falling into attentive silence. "To Celeste and James," I began, my voice steady. "Family is complicated, legacy even more so." I let my gaze rest briefly on my parents, then returned to the newlyweds. You don't build empires out of spite, you build them with vision. And then, you decide who gets to share the view. Applause broke out, followed by Celeste rising to take the microphone, her eyes glistening. "Not just my sister," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but my inspiration." The words landed in the room like a benediction. Guests leaned forward, murmurs rippled, and for the first time in years, I felt seen without qualification. Afterward, while guests danced beneath chandeliers, I stepped onto the terrace. The sunset painted the water copper and gold, the horizon stretching into infinite possibility. Jessica and Martin found me there, glasses in hand, to flawless execution. Martin toasted. "And bulletproof contracts," Jessica added with a knowing smile. I touched my glass to theirs, warmth spreading in my chest. "You two are more family to me than they've been in years," I admitted. The words didn't sting. They felt like release, an acknowledgement that loyalty is not always defined by blood, but by who stands beside you when the storm hits. Months later, Sunday dinner unfolded not at my parents' house, but in my penthouse overlooking the Seattle skyline I had claimed building by building. The long dining table gleamed under soft light, set not for obligation, but for choice. My father leaned forward mid-conversation, curiosity unforced as he asked about expansion into the Southwest. "With your model, Arizona could be untapped potential," he said. And for once, his tone carried no dismissal. In the living room, My mother proudly showed a guest a magazine feature about Wade Collective, her voice tinged with ownership of a story she had once ignored. My phone buzzed with a message from Celeste. The wedding photos had gone viral, each tagged with my company's name. "You didn't just fund this wedding," her text read. "You held it together. I see that now." I looked around my home, my family seated on my terms, my team nearby, my empire steady. The question lingered, was this reconciliation, or simply recognition earned too late? Perhaps it was both. Sometimes respect comes only after you stop begging for it. Sometimes family only learns your worth when you refuse to let them spend it cheaply. I had built walls to protect myself, but now I wondered if those walls could become bridges. The city stretched out beyond the glass, vast and unyielding. My empire had always been mine alone, but now, at least, I no longer stood invisible within it. If you found this story powerful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, would you have chosen forgiveness or stood firm on principle? Your voice matters here.